You are listening to Nerd Best Friends, a podcast that covers the nerdy conversations you're already having, or wish you could. It's the nerdiest thing you'll do this week.
Welcome back to another episode of Nerd Best Friends. I am Annalise, and I'm here with my best friend, Rob.
Hey, it's me, Rob, your best friend, your super nerd, and your podcast host. Nerd Best Friends can be found wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe and follow us now. If you would like to support our podcast, subscribe to Nerd Best Friends on Patreon for as little as $1 a month. Or if you'd like to give a one-time donation, find us at Nerd Best Friends on Venmo.
This is episode 40, and today we are getting nerdy with our favorite nerd shows and movies from the Aughts, 2000 through 2009. But first, our new segment, What I Like About It.
This week on What I Like About It, Annalise, I'm going to talk about turn-based RPG video games.
Wait, that's a lot of words.
Okay, so remember your Nintendo back in the 80s when we were kids?
Still have one.
Remember Final Fantasy, where you'd have your fighter,
Yes.
your wizard, your healer, and your archer, maybe?
For sure.
Absolutely. Turn-based, right? Everything that happened would be in an initiative order. You'd choose what that character was doing. It wasn't an action like a real-time, oh my god, my fingers have to be twitchy. It was okay, now it's the fighter's turn. What do you want the fighter to do? And you open up a menu, and you choose what the fighter's going to do that round. Go. Then it's the next person's turn. You go down the menu. That's where I fell in love with that genre, was Final Fantasy on my Nintendo. In fact, I remember clearly very much faking sick with all of my Calvin and Hobbes techniques of like holding the thermometer against the hot light bulb in my lamp next to my bed to elevate my temperature so that I could stay home from school and play Final Fantasy for like 9 hours straight while my parents were at work. Yes, 100%. I think the last Final Fantasy I played was probably Final Fantasy IV on the Super Nintendo, but that genre has, of course, continued. It's actually very popular on mobile games, like on your phone. You can find a lot of turn-based RPGs. Of course, they are littered with microtransactions.
Right.
Well, you really have to pay to play on those guys. A pretty recent game that came out was the Pathfinder RPG that came out recently that used Pathfinder rules. It was great on Steam and PS5 and Xbox One and all that kind of stuff. And then at the time of publishing, probably just a few weeks ago, Baldur's Gate 3 came out, which is
that's the big one right now.
Going crazy right now.
Yeah.
And that is very much, this uses 5th edition rules. Well, I've been playing it, and I think what we're actually seeing maybe is a preview of 6th edition rules.
Oh, interesting.
Because there are definitely some differences. For instance, drinking a healing potion is now a bonus action.
No.
Rogues, instead of getting cunning action, now just get 2 bonus actions.
Oh, that's interesting.
I'm seeing, when you drop consciousness and somebody heals you, right? So you go down below 0 hit points, right? You're knocked out.
Yeah.
And you get healed. There's like a cooldown period. You cannot take actions on your next turn. You can only take bonus actions and movement after you are brought back up in a fight.
That's actually kind of cool, although I don't like it.
It's rough, but it makes kind of sense. So I'm like, oh my gosh, I think we're seeing a lot of 6th edition previews here in this Baldur's Gate game. But I love it because it is that tabletop simulator, right? My favorite type of game is tabletop games where you take your turn. What is added on with a video game is kind of the paper doll simulation that it also is, right? When I play D&D, I can kind of theater of the mind, and especially on the online games, like, oh man, my guy's leveled up a few times. I'm going to put new character art on my token. But as far as like on the table with miniatures, like I might paint a custom mini for my guy or whatever, but that's the mini for the game. With the computer or with the video game aspect of it, you're playing paper dolls. Every chance you get, you're going into that character and you're changing your color scheme and you're putting on new clothes and, oh, what about this hat? And what about these boots? And like that kind of thing is pretty fun. But I just love the speed of that, of the turn-based. I'm going to spend some time to create a character. I'm going to take the time to optimize my little party here, make sure that there's no overlap, know what the strengths and weaknesses of from my tank, my striker, my my healer, etc. And it just gives you that time to kind of think and strategize and do the game. Tabletop RPG video games. I like them.
Which is funny that you call it tabletop.
Because they're simulators. Right?
That's
They're
awesome.
really, that's what they're doing.
Tabletop, turn-based
I guess
RPG.
they're not called tabletop. They're just called RPG. They're turn-based RPGs is what they are.
Oh, okay. Okay, there we go. Okay, all right. Well, how about some nerd mail?
Nerd mail. Nerd mail. The season's new, so there's not a ton of nerd mail. However, I did want to talk about something that was brought up after the D&D in Vegas episode, and that was the phrase "sweet fantasy Christ." Because this was something that became a joke like right away when we started this campaign. I'm sure it was Adam, like something happened and he's like, "Oh, Christ," or something. We're like, that's not something a D&D person would say. There's no Jesus Christ in D&D. And it was like, oh no, it's fantasy Jesus. So he started saying sweet fantasy Christ to the point. I mean, I was saying it in real life outside the game. I remember this one time I was walking the dog and the dog like is, going to the bathroom on this person's lawn and I can see them in their front window staring at me. So I'm like, I'm doing my thing, right? And I'd taken out the bag and I'm trying to get the old bag on so I can pick up this poop, and some other dog comes running around the corner.
Oh no.
And Dodger starts going crazy, barking at this dog, trying to chase it.
No.
And as soon as Dodger starts going nuts, Bailey didn't know what was going on, but if we're barking, we're barking. So she starts going. So my left arm is just being yanked out of the socket. Two barking dogs. I've got like poop halfway up in this bag on my other hand being spun around. And I just explained, sweet fantasy Christ. And that's where that came from. That was from that.
Oh, the image you just painted is amazing. And you are 100% correct. It was Adam, plain Luther, who brought that up early on and then just continued to bring it back. It's something that could have just been a one-time thing, but he actually made it part of his vernacular.
Everybody was saying it. It was hilarious.
Yeah. Well, especially once we went to like Christmas Town of Holly Day and we had, Fantasy Santa.
I had to. We had to have Fantasy Santa and Fantasy Christ, up against each other, a la South Park from 20 years ago.
Well, that was a good catch to the listener who brought that up. It was definitely an inside joke that the two of us didn't even think about upon recording to bring up. So good call. So our episode today is our next nerd watching series. When we started back season 1, we did nerd watching the 80s. Last season, we did nerd watching the 90s. This season, we are nerd watching the aughts. And I want to just tell a really quick story. You know where I learned the word aughts from? Stephen King and the Shawshank Redemption. There is a scene in there randomly at one point early in the movie where Andy gets sent to the library where there's an old guy who's been in prison forever, runs the library. And Andy is questioning, like, I wonder why why are they bringing me here? And Brooks is the other character's name. Brooks goes, I don't know, but it's nice to have company. And Andy says something like, how long have you been the librarian here at Shawshank? And he says, oh, I got here in '03 and it's now, blah, blah, blah. And I went, aught. So, I did my diligence and looked it up, and that's where I learned the word aughts for the 1900 through 1910 and 2000, although nobody really used it in the 2000s.
No, but it was around. I feel like it was around. Like I remember people saying it like, oh, back in '03 and this kind of stuff, like when we were there. But that's just because I hang out with nerds and we say things.
It's fewer and further between. I think I heard it a few times around the time too as more of a joke. But nonetheless, we're going to talk about our favorite TV shows and movies from the 2000s. We're going to go 2000 to 2009, maybe 2010 if you want to squeeze it in. But let's start with television shows.
Yeah, I didn't have any 2010s on there, and I just put mine in chronological order. But what I definitely realized while I was doing this list was like, oh my gosh, look at all these shows from the aughts that I love so much. And I was thinking like, oh, here's what happened.
Okay.
My son, my firstborn, was born in 2008.
Okay.
2000 through 2007, I was watching a lot of TV. I had so much free time.
I know it's coming.
Nerd watching the teens, the tens, the what's you're gonna be slim pickings. But this one, I'm like, man, I've seen all these shows. This was a golden age of television for me, especially in that nerdy kind of sci-fi superhero area, right? So the first one on my list is Smallville. I think we've talked about Smallville before on the show. I thought this was just a game changer for television. It had a new take on a classic hero, Superman, and it had that formula of being not just episodic, but serial, right? You needed to watch every episode to get the little breadcrumbs to the big finale every season, and just loved that formula. And that was one of the first times that we had seen it, or at least early on in that. If you have never seen the show Smallville, it is a show about Superman back before he was Superman, when he was a teenager back on the farm in Smallville, Kansas. This show has a ton of teen drama. It has a ton of just ridiculous music from the time. Every episode had to have a new popular song in it. Not only did it have great acting from Tom Welling, who really doesn't do much acting anymore. I think he became like a director or something like that after Smallville. Michael Rosenbaum, best Lex Luthor that has ever been on film as far as I am concerned.
No, I would agree with you, yes.
And our buddy, John Schneider.
I said Bo Schneider.
Bo Schneider. Our buddy, John Schneider from Dukes of Hazzard. And in those early seasons, he was doing his own driving stunts just like he would do on Dukes of Hazzard. There were so many times where like that old farm pickup truck would like skid out, or he'd like slide across the hood.
Tokyo Drift.
For no reason. It's like, why is Pa Kent driving 50 miles an hour and sliding into a parking spot in the middle of Smallville? Because Bo Duke. That's why.
Because you're welcome.
Absolutely. So it was a monster of the week. It had those breadcrumbs. The acting was fantastic. Lex Luthor was awesome, and it went on forever. So there was tons of stuff. And of course, 2001, we're talking VCR record this on Friday nights while I was working marching bands and stuff out at football games so that we could come home late night with our Jack in the Box and watch that episode of Smallville.
You know, what's funny about Smallville is I've only seen a little bit here and there. It was a very popular show for a whole long time. It was a long series. I really liked this. Of the episodes I saw, I really liked some of the underlying analogies in the early seasons of, you know, becoming an adolescent and hormones and puberty with Superman, with Clark Kent figuring out his
developing his Superman powers.
Yeah. And they did something similar in the Lois and Clark series, although it wasn't quite as noticeable as it was in Smallville.
Very cool. Yeah, I absolutely adored that show. At the end of every season, I would look up on somebody's like fan page all the music that was played, and I would download it on Napster and make MP3 CDs for it. So I had new emo music rocking all the time.
It was definitely one of those WB to CW vibe shows, following Buffy and Charmed and all those.
Probably went on too long, right? It suffered from its own popularity, you know. 4 or 5 seasons would have been perfect, but 9 was way too much, and it just kind of started becoming its own thing.
They followed
a different thing.
They lost track of the premise, right? They follow Clark Kent into adulthood and into working at the Daily Planet as an adult. And I think that series probably could have ended with him deciding to leave Smallville to go to Metropolis and all that.
You know, after, of course, the death of Pa Kent and how he deals with that, and then graduates from high school and maybe needs to go off to college, like could have been a split, right? And instead it just kind of got up its own butt a little bit.
Well, I had the complete opposite experience in the aughts as you did. When I started to think about shows that I watched, I couldn't think of any from the early 2000s. So something happened when Buffy ended in 2003. I stopped watching television. And that was, 2003 then would have been like my 3rd year of teaching. You and I were on staff together at Rio Mesa, and I stopped watching TV. I think I used to watch CSI Miami. I don't know why. I watch episodes of it now and going, why was this my thing on Monday nights to stay up till 11 o'clock watching until I had like first gen TiVo or whatever it was? I mean, I like crime fighting and true crime stuff, and that's kind of what it was, but I don't know. I didn't really watch anything. So I found 3. My list is much shorter. And then I found some that were worth mentioning that I just flat out didn't watch. I really think I just like my TV watching experience broke when Buffy ended. And to be honest, hasn't really returned. There's not a lot of shows that I watch that are new. Like I just watched Ted Lasso. And the only reason why I watched it is because I got 3 months free of Apple TV Plus,
Right.
and thought, well, everyone's talking about this. I'm a new principal. I wonder if there's some leadership stuff I can kind of glean from it. And that's probably one of the only modern shows that I've watched. So the first one I go with, and of course, Joss Whedon got me watching television again, was the first season of Dollhouse, which came out in 2009.
Dollhouse is fantastic.
It's
Love
phenomenal.
Dollhouse.
And I think it came back for a second season. It wasn't anything close to what that first season was, and it died.
Right.
It went away pretty quick after that. But that first season was so good, and it's sci-fi, and it's a little bit of horror, and it was a great thing for Elijah Dushku, who played Faith in Buffy, to come back and lead a series. And I thought her acting chops are so good that she just nails it.
Oh
Yeah.
my God. Best thing I've ever seen her.
She's agreed. And it reminded me of what they were trying to do with Jennifer Garner and Alias.
Oh,
Jennifer
Alias
Garner,
is another good one, but you're right. Yeah.
she didn't do as good with the face changes and the character changes that Elijah Dushku did.
I
Put
think you're
Elijah
right. I think
Dushku
you're right,
in
yeah.
Alias. Completely more like buy-in to that show. So Dollhouse, top
Interesting.
of my list.
You know who else was like fantastic with the acting chops in that was freaking Patton Oswalt, the comedian,
Yes.
in a
Yes.
straight dramatic, like tragic role in that
Yes.
show.
Yes, he did. Like unlike anything he was ever in outside of it.
Yeah.
So good. Dollhouse. If you've not seen it, listeners, highly recommend it.
All right. Well, knowing that, I'm going to start going through mine a little quicker. Otherwise, It's just going to be Rob talking this whole episode. But the next one on my list is also from 2001, and this is Star Trek Enterprise. This was a pretty big reboot from all of the 90s Star Trek stuff that had been happening. In Star Trek Next Generation really took off, and there was a big break, right? From the 60s Star Trek to the late 80s Next Generation, right? We had like 20 years in between Star Trek, but it got so popular that it was like, oh, this is great. We got Next Generation. We got Voyager. We got Deep Space Nine, right? Like, and some of those even crossed over. So there was just a lot of Star Trek on. And then those all made their course. A few years later, they decided to revamp Star Trek, but this time make it a prequel. So Star Trek Enterprise, starring Scott Bakula as Captain Archer, actually is the story of the first Enterprise ship that happens before the Captain Kirk Enterprise that we saw in the 60s.
Okay.
So what's really cool about that is it's the first starship that is going out that has light speed technology that can go outside of our galaxy and do these explorations. In that first two seasons especially, they do just a magnificent job portraying in 2000 why, when you look at the next one, it's all this 1960s big button technology kind of thing that you would see there. The way that they mix that, I think last episode we talked about Star Wars, and probably one of my favorite thing about Star Wars is the backgrounds and the sets and just the way that they grime it up and tell a story with that. That's where Star Trek Enterprise did such a good job of like making that ship this balance between what's familiar to us in the 2000s, but also how we can see that bridge being gapped to the 1960s aesthetic that they put on there, which was very interesting to me. But Scott Bakula is an absolute fantastic actor. I love that guy. There are other characters in that show that are awesome as well. The Vulcan character knocks it out of the park. The engineer Trip is one of my favorite Star Trek characters of all time. It's just awesome. It shows them going through the galaxy and picking up as they go, as they learn and meet other alien cultures and alien races, what they pick up. Like when they go out there, there's no shields up. There's no magical force field around the ship. They have to go get that from other places and those kinds of things. To say with like the photon torpedoes, all that Star Trek stuff, it shows them picking up as they go. I think Enterprise is a totally cool show. I think it's right up there with all the other Star Treks that were there, and especially because of the acting of good old Scott Bakula.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you brought up that it's kind of like a prequel, because someone like me looking from the outside in on the whole Star Trek family would have had no idea that was the case. And it starts to make sense, all the excitement about the show at the time.
You know what I would compare it to, kind of why I like it so much, is I like it like I like Rogue One. You know how Rogue One was just like, oh, we're going to tell this story right before what happened in Star Wars, and it's probably not going to be pretty. That's how this one is. It's not as tragic as that one, but that's that idea of like, hey,
I mean, that's what I was thinking about.
What happened right before.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking about as you were describing it. So Good analogy.
And then before you go to your next one, I'm just going to say that the next one on my list was from 2002, Firefly. Of course, we did a whole episode on it, so I'm not going to wax elegant about it. I'm just going to put a check mark on that list so nobody nerd corrects us like, I can't believe you didn't say Firefly. I said it. All right, Annalise, what's next on your list?
Our whole, if you haven't, and listeners, if you're new to the podcast, go back to season 2 and listen to our extravaganza about Firefly. It's a good episode. The next on my list, also from, again, right at the end of the aughts, 2009, is the debut of Glee. And there's 2 things I liked about this show. Number 1, if you ever go back and watch the pilot, it gave me, I don't know, chills and welling of tears, maybe not quite tears, of the experience of being a music educator. There's a whole underlying theme in that pilot episode about whether or not this teacher should continue teaching. And he had loved Glee Club when he was in high school, and he just didn't see that joy in his job, decides to reinvigorate the Glee Club. You get through that episode and it's not working out, and he thinks he's just going to leave teaching altogether. Obviously that doesn't happen because this series goes on for a long time. The end of that episode just gave me so many chills and so much personal representation or validation of my career at that time. How many years in? 9 years in at that point when that show started. It also gave an avenue. I remember I was at that time trying to build an a cappella choir at a high school in North Las Vegas, where a lot of kids just wanted to sing what their favorite artists were on the radio and didn't understand the connection between a cappella choir and modern music. And that show helped bridge and build my a cappella program to be 2 or 3 groups big by the time I left that school in 2015. So the show became problematic. There are some themes now that you would not see. There's some troubling storylines. I mean, it wasn't the perfect show, but that first season was very special for a lot of reasons. And what can be nerdier than a bunch of kids singing and dancing and being in their Glee Club choir at high school?
Gotcha. I never watched this show. I don't think I've seen a minute of the show Glee, maybe a music video out of context or something. The only thing I remember about Glee when it was coming out was that they did an episode where they sang the acoustic version of Baby's Got Back by Jonathan Colton.
Yeah.
But they didn't credit him. And so Jonathan Colton got all pissed. And so the nerd community was all mad at Glee because they didn't give Jonathan Colton credit for that song. And they didn't even change. There's a part in that song where it's like, he says his name in it. Like
and
there's a part where
names.
Something about a bubble makes a lot's in trouble.
Yeah.
But in that one, it changes to like Johnny C's in trouble. And they didn't even change that part.
Wow.
But they didn't give him credit for it. That's the only knowledge of Glee I have, was that they crossed Jonathan Colton.
Well, I can tell you the early seasons, they did so well on 2 things. Their covers actually became, at the time with Apple Music, the way they used to have their
Listen Now or New Music. Or
it would, I mean, or you could go in and buy the singles. Like, here's this song from last night's episode for 99 cents, or how they used to sell music on streaming services before Spotify. Mm-hmm. Glee songs and Glee covers were topping the charts consistently. The second thing they did really well that you now see in a cappella groups is the way they blended songs and mixed songs. It really wasn't popular outwardly at the time. There's a lot of people doing it, but they had some really amazing just blends of music that I still like listening to now.
I bet I've heard a lot more Glee songs than I know, because I really like covers and mashups and stuff. Mm-hmm. So I've probably heard a bunch of those and just not known where the origin was.
Yeah. They have some really quality mashups, I will say. And the peak for me was the episode, they did a Fleetwood Mac episode of the Rumors album. I thought it was really well done. I do actually go back once in a while when I'm bored and just put that episode on. Glee, a bunch of nerds singing, was the second show on my list.
I'm going to talk about 2 real quick, and they're both science fiction comedies. This first one, I'm almost 100% sure was a Sci-Fi Network show back in 2002.
Okay, yeah.
And this was the show Eureka. Somehow I heard about this show because Will Wheaton was in this show. He was like a minor character in this show. And so listening to other things that on and around Will Wheaton, like, Geek and Sundry Network and things on YouTube, they would talk about Eureka. And I checked out this show. Absolutely loved it. I love the show Eureka because it is charming. It is sweet and innocent and just a charming show. It is about a small town sheriff, and this small town is a place where it's one of those, like, the whole community is built around a science facility kind of thing where they're coming up with all these new, innovative, futuristic technologies. And so the monster of the week is instead this new futuristic technology going wrong and how it's affecting the town, and how this sheriff with his kind of folksy street smarts has to save the day while he's surrounded by all of these super hyper intelligent nerd folks. Right. So there's that dichotomy there, and it's like comfort food. Eureka is just a comfortable thing. Like, nothing in Eureka is going to make you upset or give you tension or anything like that. It's just going to be this nice, sweet show where they've got 2000 as 2000 can be special effects, right? With all these sightseeing where it's like literally a cartoon laid over the video kind of thing.
Or a lot of stolen Matrix stuff, because that was right after Matrix came out and everyone was using that same technology. Yeah.
Maybe for that first episode and the last episode where they could have some budget money. Yes.
I've never heard of this show.
I'm not surprised. It was a sci-fi show. So if you weren't watching sci-fi, right, you're not seeing commercials for it and those kinds of things. Right. But again, I found it because of the Will Wheaton connection and Felicia Day connection and Geek and Sundry and the stuff that I was watching there. Yeah, I don't know. If you ever find the need to have that just nice, sweet show, I would say that's the other one. That's one to go to. The other one I wanted to talk about then was Chuck.
Chuck
is another very silly show, right? The Zachary Levi vehicle, right?
Yes.
Before this guy got so popular and became, the person who's in everything, Zachary Levi was Chuck. And this was a comedy spy show. And again, just kind of problem of the week. The charm and goofiness and facial expressions of Zachary Levi really carried it through the whole way. There was, of course, the Firefly connection with Adam Baldwin after he got done with Angel. Jumped over to be on Chuck after that and just kept going from silly sci-fi show to silly sci-fi show.
There's another one that I didn't watch. But it's the ultimate nerd, right? Chuck is the ultimate nerd working as like geek guy at Best Buy. And
yes,
it's
like an analog for Geek Squad. The little sidekick dude, him. And it's like, what are the two nerds in Buffy the Vampire Slayer?
You mean the three nerds?
Well, not the guy who turns evil and gets his skin ripped off. But the other
Andrew is the one that sticks around. Right. And then Jonathan. Andrew
it's like if Andrew and Jonathan were the protagonists and they were the Geek Squad and got magic powers and became spies. Right. It's just another sweet, nice show. Those kind of go in that spot of if you were gonna watch if you were gonna go back to watch a 2000 show, like if I was having, I don't know, if I was ever just having a stressful, anxious time and needed to binge watch some old shows, those would be the ones I would go to just be like, everything's gonna work out okay for these wholesome folks.
The nerds do win.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's jump back over to you. What do you got?
My last show on this list that I actually watched is 30 Rock. And I think it's a little bit of a stretch to call it a nerd show, but I'll say it for a couple of reasons. The first reason is I don't know that there's another successful behind the scenes of Hollywood making fun of Hollywood that's successful. And that's pretty nerdy place to be, where you are watching this kind of fake Saturday Night Live variety show with a cast of characters that are just totally bonkers and off the wall. I'm going to just side note tangent real quick. One of my favorite things from the show is Tracy Morgan's character.
Yeah.
Is just ridiculous.
Right. And cartoon character ridiculous.
I mean, yes, cartoon character ridiculous. Somewhere in the 2010s, there was a series of read this line. Was it a Tracy Morgan line from 30 Rock or something Kanye West tweeted? And oh my gosh,
a fun game.
Oh my gosh, I got every single one of them wrong. And it just gosh. Look, I guarantee listeners, Rob, look this up. It is hilarious.
No, don't. You know what? That's a perfect game we could play at a live show. If we ever get Nerd Travels into doing live shows, that's the game we're playing.
Well, for our Patreon users, we will get to live shows. Maybe we'll play that with you all in a live show. So don't look it up. I take it back. But Tracy Morgan just brilliantly plays this just bonkers character. And then Tina Fey, who I'm a big Tina Fey fan. And the other thing that I find nerdy that I have all 3 seasons is when we get into women empowerment, because realistically, like, women writers in a writer's room are so underutilized, under celebrated. Tina Fey, Amy Poehler all came from writers' rooms, and Tina Fey used that experience to write this series. And you have Alec Baldwin playing the big bad corporate bad guy, and Tina Fey, and I mean, there's just so much gold in this series, and it rings very true what was happening to television in the early 2000s, and it's just witty and funny. So, like I said, loose connection to nerdism, but I think there's a couple of things that cling on in terms of nerdy shows in the aughts.
I also really like that genre of kind of meta. We're a movie looking at ourselves as a movie, or a show looking at ourselves as a show. One of my favorite movies is Get Shorty with John Travolta.
Oh, sure.
And, Danny DeVito and stuff. Yes. And that's just a very loose story based on a true story of, like, a guy coming into Hollywood and trying to break in from the Florida mafia and trying to break into show business. It's always talking about itself, and all of the scenes are analogs for what they're doing, but they don't see that they're doing it at the time. I think that's a really clever take, and I like that one a lot. While you've got Apple TV on your free subscription, I believe The Morning Show is also like I haven't seen it, but I've heard there's another show on there with Jennifer Aniston called The Morning Show, which is,
and it's a little bit of that same, like, behind the scenes
meta. We're
of a morning show.
Morning show, but it's about the people behind the scenes kind of thing. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Now I'm going to talk about 3. I'm going to bundle 3 together now. And these are the opposite of the first ones I was talking about. If those last 2 were wholesome and sweet and just stress-free, relax, these ones are the ones where there was tension, where you had to watch the next episode because your neck was just in knots because what was going to happen next. The first one is Terminator: The Sarah Connor Chronicles. This show rips. It's so cool. This was the show that I felt really helped expand that Terminator big universe, right? Because you had Terminator, and then you had Terminator 2, which was, in my opinion, way better. Like, that's a super cool movie. But then this show came out, and it was like, well, what are Sarah and John Connors doing in the meantime? They are caught in this place of trying to live a life. Like, this kid still has to go to school. They still have to make money and work, but at any moment, they're always looking over their shoulder because some killer robot assassin from the future is going to come grab them. And they end up getting a Terminator of their own to kind of protect them. And that's played by our friend from the Joss Whedon verse, Summer Glau, as the Terminator, who poses as John Connor's sister, and they go to high school together, and every once in a while a robot assassin from the future shows up, and there's like crazy gunfight and car chase and all that kind of stuff. So that was a really cool show. And I felt like as the movies went on and they got to like the 4th and 5th movie, I felt like they tied in best with the show, and it really kind of put that, it helped really round out that expanded universe that the Terminator movies went through. And the other one like that then was Lost. Lost was so bonkers, and they did such a good job of setting up these mysteries and leaving you on cliffhangers every week. And it was just weird, wild stuff that would be going on, from the polar bear in the middle of the jungle to, you know, the World War II broadcasts of Morse code that were still going on for years and years, to the Dharma Initiative and all the crazy experiments. Or just every episode and every season was like, what's going to happen next? Are they going to explain this one? What's going on? Just another tension-filled one.
I'm going to kind of turn the table on you here a little bit and ask you something you've asked me a few times. Lost is easily one of the most popular shows of the 2000s. I don't see the nerdy connection. What's nerdy about it?
Oh, well, what was nerdy about it was not straightforward. There was this meta around it, or this kind of spiritualism thing that happened. Like, I don't know if you watched it, but they all died in that plane crash, and all of this happened in some sort of weird afterlife thing.
Well, is that a spoiler alert?
Spoiler alert for Lost from 2004.
I guess I don't have to watch it. So wait, it goes through all those seasons and they're dead?
Yeah. And like God is there and the devil and stuff. It's very science fiction.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Move on. That's awful. Move on. I will never watch that show. Move on. That's
No,
fine.
nor should you. It doesn't, I don't think it holds up, right?
Sure.
It set a mold at that time for how you could do that tension and drama and setup
Sure,
for very little payoff. Just, you know what I mean? Like every week was, you got to watch the next episode because look how much we've built. And then the payoff was like, anyway, that happened. We're going to go on to the next big build. So looking at it now, you'd be like, oh, geez, how tropey. But the last one, though, I think does hold up, and I can't wait to watch it again, is Battlestar Galactica.
Oh, absolutely.
The Battlestar Galactica reboot from 2005 is fantastic. Everybody in there, starting with Edward James Olmos, is knocking it out of the park. Every episode, chewing up the scenery in every scene. I mean, you could look at it cynically and be like, the overacting in this show is ridiculous, but I just love it. Chef's kiss. It's so good. Music was great. Setting was awesome. Tension built every episode. The mystery was there. More than anything, the characters. When we talk about that idea of public choice theory that they kind of started to explore in Andor, as far as like, hey, very much in Star Trek, right? When we look at a Star Trek science fiction, the Federation, the character's place in that takes precedence, right? I am Captain Archer. I am Captain Picard, and all of my decisions and everything about my personality revolves around that role. I am LeVar Burton, the engineer, and that's who I am. And I might have different character traits, but at the end of the day, my job is to be an engineer for this ship and make sure that I do my part to duty, right? And Federation. Right. Battlestar Galactica takes that and says, okay, here's the engineer, here's the pilot, here's the captain, here's the whatever. And it's like, that's what they need to do. But this person is cheating on their wife. This person is an alcoholic. This person is being put in a position they've never been in before. This person used to be a teacher and now they're the president of the United States. It's more about the struggle of humanity and who they are than it is the other way around.
And I've seen bits and pieces of this. It's a great show. I just never got into watching episode after episode after episode, but some big name actors playing parts and just, like you said, just knocking it out of the park. It's really well done.
We're going to get there on this show at some point. We're going to do our deep dive into Battlestar Galactica, I'm sure.
Right on. I'm just going to mention 4 really quick that I did not watch, but in my research for this episode felt compelled enough to bring them up because they are big time nerdy favorites. The first one is Doctor Who. From
Doctor Who. That one's going to be on my also ran list. I've got some stuff to say about Doctor Who, the 2005 reboot, but that'll be in the newsletter for patrons only.
Okay. Well, then I will not continue to talk about Doctor Who. The next 3 on my list, Big Bang Theory from 2007. To me, like Chuck, is the ultimate nerd show. These guys were nerds, scientists. They played D&D. They had video game, marathons all connected together. They talked a lot of nerd stuff. There's so much pop culture nerd reference. Stephen Hawking was on the show. Will Wheaton was on the show. I mean, it's a nerd empire and a show all about nerds.
You know, it's so funny.
What's that?
I hate that show.
A lot of people, it's a hit or miss. I have never heard anybody
crazy.
I've never heard of anybody be like, it's okay. People either love it or they don't. Actually, I'm one of the people that's the rare in between because I've seen some episodes that I'm like, and I've seen some episodes that are cringe. And then I've seen some episodes that are like, yeah, they understand nerds. So, but yeah, I mean, it was so popular, it ran through into the 2020s.
For sure. I can't argue with that. Maybe there's something wrong with me, but there are no jokes in that show. It's just nerd references and a laugh track. And it's like, oh, that's like Guy Gardner flying the spaceship through the Nebulon. And I'm like, and laugh track. And I'm like, that's not a joke.
Oh, we're gonna get some nerd mail about that for sure.
Oh, bring it.
The other two real quick, the show Heroes, which was only 2 seasons long, 2006, 2008.
I watched that show. Save the cheerleader, save the world, but it just, you know what the thing was about it?
No, I never watched it. What's the thing?
Oh, it was called Heroes, but it was about anti-heroes. Like it tried to be like, in comic books in the 90s, they made all the all the heroes dark and gritty and murder people and put extra lines on their costumes. It was like that. It was just, nobody actually stepped up and was a hero. Remember the show? Remember the movie with Bruce Willis, Unbreakable, where he was like,
oh gosh,
a normal dude, but he was also invulnerable, and he kind of struggled with like what he should be doing and living his life, but also like things would happen and he knew he could help people, but sometimes he didn't because he was kind of freaking out about what he did. But in the end, he made the right choices and saved people and became a hero. It was like that, except nobody ever made the right choices and became a hero. At least when I stopped watching. I think I watched the first 2 seasons and I was like, we can stop this. Nothing's going to happen.
I don't think you're the only one to feel that way because it didn't go past season 2. So
that could have been the writer's strike. Wasn't 2008 the big writer's strike in the
Oh,
2000s?
a lot of shows died because of that writer's strike. Yes. They just decided not to bring them back once the writer's strike ended. Yes.
Like, not a nerdy show, just a couple like My Name is Earl. Remember that show? God, that was a funny show. Writer's strike killed it.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, let's be real. It was ready to die anyways. That also went on a season or two too long.
Oh, too long? Yeah, I don't remember.
Yeah. I watched the first couple seasons and I remember going, this isn't very funny anymore. And then it went on a few more seasons and then writer's strike. But the last one on this list is Supernatural. Another one of those kind of horror genre nerdy. There's a bunch of rules to the supernatural world, and
it's a super cool show. I started watching it, gosh, when they hit their 20th season or something, and people were talking about like, oh my God, what a milestone. I was like, oh, you know what? I bet there's nerds on the internet who have made a list of like, these are kind of the must watch episodes. Like, I like doing that, like truncating the seasons.
Yes.
And so I was like, all right, I'm going to do it. And I downloaded it and I put something together and I watched the first season. I watched the second season. I'm like, this is really cool. But there just kept being like, the list was so long. It just seemed like so much that I would never get through it. The list was just too long. It was so daunting when I would look at like, let me watch my next episode of Supernatural. And I pull up that list and it would just go on the screen. I was like, or I could watch something new.
That is why I have not started.
But it is good. What I saw was really good.
To me, it's like a Simpsons. Can you imagine trying to start The Simpsons? Yeah, there's no way.
I did, but I made it very finite because, Andrew was like 12. I'm like, you've never seen an episode of The Simpsons? So I was like, Simpsons best 100 episodes, because it's not serial. You don't have to watch one to enjoy the other.
That's true.
So we just watched 100 episodes of The Simpsons over a year, and that was that.
I hope there were a lot of Halloween episodes in that list.
We did see some Halloween episodes. A lot of episodes from those first 4 seasons are the ones that just really hang on for everybody.
But we're not talking about The Simpsons.
No,
Supernatural was the last on that list. Did you have any more television shows to talk about?
I do. I've got one more, which will bookend this. My first one I talked about was Smallville from 2001. This is Merlin from 2008. And this one was not affected by the writer's strike because it is a BBC show that was filmed over there. Now, this show is an absolute 100% ripoff of Smallville.
Okay.
Instead of Superman being a teenager and growing up into the hero he was, this is about the wizard Merlin being a teenager and how he's going to grow up to be the most famous wizard of all time with King Arthur and Excalibur and all that stuff. It is down to, it might even be shot for shot, episode to episode, except instead of Superman in Smallville, it's Merlin in medieval Europe. It is amazing. But for all the reasons I love Smallville, I love this show. Like, it's super, super good. Anthony Stewart Head is the king of England in this one. And much like Lex Luthor in Smallville, just knocking it out of the park with Michael Rosenbaum, Anthony Stewart Head just crushes it as the king who outlaws magic and makes, Merlin this pariah in the show Merlin. I love it. It's amazing. But basically, they're the same show. My first and last, it says Merlin. It's exactly what you think it's going to be.
You're telling me it's a Giles movie or a Giles TV show? I know nothing about it.
You never knew that Anthony Stewart Head had his own huge series?
I could IMDb all that stuff, but no, I don't have time to do all that.
Well, I figured it'd come up on social media or something. Like sometimes you'd see pictures of him wearing a crown and a big old cape and stuff, and you'd be like, what's this?
I don't think that's ever come up. But now that you've said it, the next time I open my phone, which is sitting right next to me right now, it's going to pop up. I guarantee it's going to pop up.
Probably so. There was also, and I'm looking at the name before Katie McGrath. Katie McGrath, because she is big in the Supergirl television show right now.
Is she
She's
Supergirl?
Lena Luthor in
No.
Supergirl.
No idea.
All right. Never mind then. Cut that part.
Okay, well, Merlin, a BBC show. I'm gonna have to look it up now because I like.
Actually, I'll tell you what, it's better than Smallville because you know what it does? After season 4, when they've told the story, it ends because BBC don't worry about that kind of stuff. Unlike Smallville. They don't
worry about ratings and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, no, they're like, hey, we told our story and we're good.
Well, let's go on to movies.
Heck yeah.
I'll start mine. Mine is not in any chronological order. Other than this is the first on my list in terms of nerdy movies. Surprises me that it's a superhero movie, but it was so impactful. And that was The Dark Knight, which came out in 2008. It's impactful to me for a few reasons. Number one, I think it's the best Batman movie other than the very first one with Michael Keaton. The very first one with Michael Keaton was very good. This one, I think is, if not just as good, it's better.
I'm with you.
I remember you and I watched this, maybe a little bit hungover in Red Rock where we just had our D&D extravaganza. My 30th birthday weekend. You drove out with one of our drum friends that worked with us and we stayed at Red Rock and we partied and I turned 30 and then we slept in and the next day The Dark Knight was released. And so we went to the movie theater there at Red Rock, a little bit hungover. We had Capriati sandwiches to kind of heal our stomachs a little bit. Got some popcorn and soda and we sat and watched The Dark Knight, and watching it that opening weekend in the theater with a lot of people who were into it. There are a couple of those scenes that still give me the chills, like when he flips the semi-truck, watching that live with other people, just minds blown.
For me, it's the disappearing pencil. I can't get that scene out of my mind. It haunts me and I hate it.
It lives in my head rent free and I love it because I love the horror stuff, right? And we all know, this obviously was a role that was problematic for Heath Ledger and started on the path that eventually led to his early passing not long after the movie was released. But what a phenomenal performance and the best version of the Joker to this day. Joaquin Phoenix did an amazing Joker, but that story was being told in a different premise. That was kind of the start.
There was no
Joker.
Batman in that. Like Joker is different having to play opposite a Batman.
Yes. This is almost as if that Joaquin Phoenix Joker could potentially have turned into the Heath Ledger Joker, but their backstories weren't exactly the same. That being said, phenomenal performance all the way around from everybody in that movie. There's not a weak link in that movie at all. It's superhero. It's super nerdy. It's the best of that trilogy that came out and the best Batman movie that ever came out.
And it's aged and people look back at it and, they'll be like, oh my gosh, that trilogy was ridiculous looking back on it 10 years later. What was up with the voice and all that kind of stuff?
We made fun of that at the time.
I don't even remember this. We made fun of it at the time. I remember it being so cool. It just was so cool.
I remember walking up going, why is he talking like this? And we were like, we're disguising we talked the rest of the weekend like that.
Yeah, of course we did. Like we had Dark Knight fever and so did everybody else. That was an absolute turning point for superhero movies, especially from nobody remembered what it was like when that first Batman reboot came out because all we remembered was where it ended up. Like what was the fifth one in that kind of series with the bat nipples and all the like ridiculous campy stuff. Like it had gone from the 66 TV show camp and then the first Michael Keaton one came out and we're like, whoa, this is Batman.
It's
this
dark
is crazy.
And it's real. Yeah.
And then it just slinky down the stairs back into a super campy, colorful thing. This was a reset, and it was a reset that was very modern and very just cool, right?
Yeah. And even if the storylines and the CGI doesn't hold up all these years later, the performances do. Nothing, weird voice or not weird voice, it's still masterful performances from everybody in that cast.
I cannot start my list of movies in the 2000s except for Lord of the Rings, Lord of the Rings, Lord of the Rings. Fellowship of the Rings, Return of the King, all of them came out in the 2000s. These movies are perfect. They're flawless. They're absolutely incredible. I have seen them like Dark Knight. I've seen them all just a dozen times, and I will continue to watch them throughout my life. They have the added bonus for me of being representations of some of my favorite books as well that we talked about in a previous episode. And I think I mentioned in that episode too, these movies are so good. I don't even need to read the books anymore because there's such a perfect adaptation. There's such a perfect representation of what I in my head see when I think about these high fantasy stories. When we're playing Dungeons and Dragons, when I'm writing adventures, when we're doing this RPG thing, that's how it looks in my head, is how the Lord of the Rings trilogy looks.
I have no feedback to it because I've also not.
We're going to get there too.
Oh, that has to be a between season watch because I don't have 90 hours of my life to watch to sit and watch it. JK, we'll do it.
You'd be surprised. If you can on a Sunday watch 2 football games, you can watch a Lord of the Rings movie.
I don't watch 2 football games on a Sunday. I barely watch one. And I cleaned the house the entire time the 49ers were throttling Not Seattle. 49ers were throttling Pittsburgh. Okay. Second on my list is The 40-Year-Old Virgin.
I love this movie.
Yeah. It's a silly movie. It doesn't age well in some spaces, but it's that witty humor that we all love. And of course, lots of famous actors in this movie. Mm-hmm. Steve Carell plays the ultimate nerd. And when I think of this movie, I think of a scene that probably no one else ever thinks of. You know, if I'm sitting around the table with my admin team and, you know, hey, how was your weekend? What did you do this weekend? What always flashes in my mind is a scene of him. He's sitting and talking to Paul Rudd's character. You know, I live a very fulfilling life. You know, he's struggling that now that his coworkers know that he's 40 and he's a virgin. I have a very fulfilling life. And it's this really quick flashback of him painting a miniature.
The montage.
Yes, he's painting a miniature. He's marching around and playing the baritone. He's playing PlayStation by himself, including a karaoke one by himself. And that's what he did for the weekend. Oh my gosh. I look at that and I think, what the perfect life.
Absolutely.
That's what I did this weekend.
That exact scene is the touchstone I use for everyone who I meet. If I'm meeting people and they're like, oh, do you have any hobbies and kind of things? I'm like, oh, I'm like a nerd, right? Like do a lot of nerd stuff with like games and collections and stuff
have
like
you
that.
seen the 40-year-old
and they're like,
virgin?
Oh, really? Like, what do you mean? I'm like, have you seen the movie 40-Year-Old Virgin? Remember that montage of all the nerdy things he does? That's exactly what I do every single weekend.
Yes. And sometimes the weeknights if I can.
Yeah, if I can. If I get away with
I
it,
use
it's
that
every night.
I 100% use that as well. And sometimes I've even texted the link to people like, this is the kind of nerd I am. Especially when I was single again and finally got back out in the dating world. I texted that link to a few people and like, this is what you're getting into.
Yes.
Like I absolutely used it. But the whole movie's really cute. It's really campy. It's really funny. What I love about those movies is they have a script, but they just let the actors go off. And so it creates great movies. It creates great bloopers. And a lot of those scenes is just them riffing on each other.
The standout I have for that kind of thing is Romney Malco. That dude can improvise like nobody's business. The Romney Malco scenes in that movie are some of the funniest scenes in that movie.
Yes. And it reminds me of Paul Rudd in the Ant-Man. That whole scene in Ant-Man was improvised between those two at the very end. Well, I'll see you next time. Oh, where are you going to see me again? Well, you know, like this weekend. Did you want to go see a movie?
Well, I thought you were asking me out for dinner or something.
Yeah. Yeah. And that whole awkward exchange was completely improvised and they left it in the movie. That's a lot of 40-Year-Old Virgin as well. So that's the second. That's the second one on my list.
Did you ever get a chance to watch WandaVision?
Yes.
Because that detective guy comes back and is part of that show. And he also kind of gets in those awkward, like, wait, what did you say? Nothing.
Someone did a little montage of that character in a few different movies. And there's one about a card trick.
Yes.
That
Iron Man, he shows him a card trick. And then 2 movies later, he's in there practicing the card trick at his desk or something.
And then in WandaVision, he brings out his business card using that trick. So it is a great montage that I saw online.
Oh my gosh.
What else you got on your list?
Once again, we'll go over this one kind of quick. Serenity, 2005, the finale, the tie-up movie to the series that was Firefly. We talked about it in our Firefly episode, but again, I feel like that is one of the most important movies because it took something that was a TV show that was beloved, that didn't get an ending, and it was crowdfunded into existence to give this story and these characters an ending that I think was fantastic and they originally deserved.
And brought about only because of the outcry of Firefly ending after one season. So
So not only a great movie, but like that nerd fandom having a victory. The other one I'll talk about kind of quickly is The Golden Compass, starring Nicole Kidman. The Golden Compass is a movie that came from a book series, and it's a 3-book series, and this movie was meant to be a trilogy. You might remember this movie because of all the awesome CGI polar bears wearing armor. That's definitely a hook that brought me in, like, what is this? I saw this movie. It was awesome. I read the book. The book series is called His Dark Materials. Oh my gosh, this is awesome. And I remember going to the bookstore when there were still bookstores. I was like, oh, I'm interested in this book, The Golden Compass. And she's like, oh yeah, that's over here, kind of in the children, like the young adults section or whatever, and was looking through. And she looked at me, she's like, are you a very religious person? And I was like, no, I'm not. And she goes, oh, well, a lot of religious people don't like these books. They're kind of anti-religion. And of course, for me, I'm like, oh my God, you know what? I changed my mind. I'll take all 3. Like, I love it. And so this is definitely like a send up of Catholicism and the way that they do their rules and kind of the oppression, especially in early, Europe, of what the church meant and how it affected the state and those kinds of things, but all in metaphor. What this is really about is, not really, but what this is on the surface about is a little girl who lives in a universe where people's souls live outside of their bodies in the form of animals.
Oh.
And it's an awesome theme because you can read into the metaphor of what each animal is and what that personality of that person might be as you're going through the book. And you meet the guy they call them demons, right? Their demon is kind of their soul, this spiritual essence that lives outside of them. The person whose demon is an owl says something different than the person whose demon is a snake, who says something different than whose person is a mouse, who's, that kind of thing. And it's just, I think it's really great. The movie, I had really high hopes for it. There are armored polar bears that fight in it, which is awesome to me. That was another one that just everything was against it. That movie came out. It was fine. The year later, there was a writer's strike. And of course, as could be predicted, there was a large outcry of people trying to ban the movie, people buying the movie and burning it and all this kind of stuff because of its anti-Catholicism or anti-Christian kind of message, which I felt was very much toned down in the movie.
In the movie? Okay.
Yeah, like I don't think you would read that really in the movie as much as you would have in the book, but it did have that backlash. And so they never made the other 2 until recently. They did a show on HBO, the show was titled His Dark Materials, and they did 3 seasons of that show, which were the 3 books, and it is phenomenal.
Okay. I've heard of His Dark Materials. You've actually recommended it before.
Yeah, probably.
I had never heard of The Golden Compass.
That's the first book / first movie. If you watch the show, the first chapter, right? The first season 1 is called The Golden Compass. But yeah, that HBO show did an amazing job of it. But that movie from 2007, I really liked it. It made me go and read the books. It made me super excited later for when we finally got that story in another way. And I definitely recommend all 3.
I'm going to talk about 2 in a row very quickly because, well, we'll talk about why in a little bit, but one of the next movies on my list is Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man. 2000, I think the last movie came out right towards the end of the aughts. That trilogy of Spider-Man was pretty big movies at the time, and I don't want to say too much about it, which we'll talk about why at the end of the episode, but I definitely wanted that to be on the list. Well, I don't want to say too much about it because...
Well, are we going to talk about it again? Because I got stuff to say about it, but I can wait.
Well, we have an upcoming episode, which we are going to be talking about Spider-Man that maybe we save it for.
All right. Well, I'll just say I remember when these movies came out being super excited and super hyped about them.
Yes.
Going back and watching them now, it's funny that the things that I liked about them then are the things that I don't like about them now.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And, I think they still hold up for the Spider-Man story. I think they still hold up really, really well. I think Tom Holland was born to play Spider-Man, and the way he plays Spider-Man, I think, is just perfect.
I thought Andrew Garfield did a phenomenal job playing Spider-Man. I like Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man.
I'm not saying the other Spider-Mans were not good, but I think Tom Holland was put on this earth to portray Spider-Man. And we'll talk about it more in our Spider-Man episode this season, but had to mention that very briefly. So the next on my list is, again, the ultimate nerd, Napoleon Dynamite. This movie is just wacky. It is about this. He's just out there. Napoleon Dynamite is just out there. And I'll be honest with you. Yeah, he is. I didn't get the movie the first time I watched it. I remember the first time I watched it is when we were in New York, the trip with Rio Mesa, and the kids asked to put it on the bus while we were busing
I remember
to
watching it
the airport or whatever. Yeah, I watched it. I didn't get it. And then I watched it again. I'm like, okay, this is actually really funny. It's really subtly funny that I guess I just couldn't get the subtleness on the bus, because the way the buses used to show movies and it's all crackling sound and stuff. Napoleon Dynamite is a nerd, and it's about him being a nerd and being himself authentically. And it's just a good movie, and it's funny. So what do you have next on your list?
I've got two more. They're both from 2009, right at the end here. One is Night at the Museum. I like the movie.
Oh gosh. Okay.
It's a kid's movie, but it's cute. Like, it's funny. It has a science fiction magical kind of element to it. It is a movie where, when I was a sixth grade teacher and there needed to be a movie day, damn, you could put on Night at the Museum anytime and everybody's going to watch it. It's just a solid 2000s movie that is funny for everybody, but it's also just a safe, nice movie, right?
Yeah, for sure.
The last one I want to talk about then is the Star Trek movie reboot. This is the Chris Pine Star Trek, right?
Okay.
I think they made a whole trilogy out of that. Started at the end of the 2000s in 2009 as well. It's cool. It's different. Like, it's not Captain Kirk, right? It's not William Shatner. It's not Leonard Nimoy. It can't be, right? But it's pretty cool. It's just cool in a different way. Instead of being that science fiction genre of, that we've talked about before, looking at the human experience through alien worlds or future technology, it's an action flick, but it's cool. It's Star Trek, and it's cool.
So again, for someone on the outside in of Star Trek, this was a reboot, meaning this is Captain Kirk and it's not like a extending of the universe. It's like we're retelling these stories.
Yes and no. Because filmmakers are cowards, because Hollywood is full of cowards. At the end of the movie, instead of just letting it be its own thing in a Star Trek reboot, they like wheel in 85-year-old Leonard Nimoy to be original Spock, like from another universe in it.
Oh boy.
For no reason. Like, it's
okay. And
so
enough
it's
said. Got it.
Multiverse Captain Kirk, I guess now, and the other Kirk also still, like, it's not great.
That's kind of what they did with the new West Side Story, Steven Spielberg's West Side Story, which was pretty great. But they had Rita Moreno, who played in the movie from the 60s. She played Anita. And they brought her back and changed the shopkeep to a female Puerto Rican. Instead of a white male, she marries the white male, but the white male who owned Pop or whatever his name is, who owned the store is deceased. And so she's running the store in the middle of this neighborhood of these gangs fighting each other. And Rita Moreno is a gem. She's one of the very few EGOTs in this world. And she did a phenomenal job, but they changed some of the story to fit her back into the new West Side Story. She's playing a different character. Yeah. It didn't create a multiverse, but so
you know how in Wonder Woman, like, Linda Carter is in that movie as some like art dealer or something, but it's like, oh, hey,
just like
that's
a random, like,
or like when they did the reboot of Ghostbusters, when it was like the female Ghostbusters, and there's like a shop owner and it's Dan Aykroyd, but he's not playing Ray Stantz, right? That's okay. I think that's cool because it's like, oh, hey, they brought back the whatever guy, whatever. This is not. This is like, so we got Captain Kirk and we got Spock and we got McCoy and they're doing all their things, but then also other Spock is here from the other universe, but also the future, but also he's not the same guy, but it's definitely Spock, everybody. Like, that sucks.
Yeah.
Never mind. I don't know why this movie made it on my list.
Because you like Star Trek, even when it's bad. It's like pizza. Even when it's bad, it's still good.
Perfect.
The last movie on my list, and again, I think this is a bit of a stretch in terms of nerds, but I'm going on the I love Tina Fey train. I'm a big fan of Tina Fey and the woman empowerment, and she wrote Mean Girls, which came out in 2004. It is a cult movie with a cult following. Now it's even a musical. All solidarity to the writer's strike, but Tina Fey is a phenomenal writer, and she wrote a really great movie about the high school experience and all the mean girls that are in high school, and of course takes it to comedy 11. I thought this is another one that has a lot of really famous actors when they were young. Tina Fey still relatively just known from SNL at this point. This is I think before 30 Rock started even. Yeah, this is before 30 Rock debuted, so she's still trying to make that jump from SNL to movies, and it's a good one. If you've not seen Mean Girls, it's worth a watch. It's funny in that really dry, dark humor way that I really love.
I actually have never seen Mean Girls, and I did not know that it was a Tina Fey written movie. That's very cool. One of these days, you know when I'll see it? I'm going to see the musical because my son's going to drag me there at some point.
Oh, probably. Yeah. But the musical is one thing. If you watch it, you'll be surprised how many big name actors on it, and some of them before they were like big name actors. So it is worth a watch. I think you'll roll your eyes at some of it, but it just be aware it is dark, dry humor.
Okay.
Yeah. But funny as heck.
There are glaring omissions
from 100%.
The list that we just talked about. Call to action one. What are your favorite movies from the aughts? What are your favorite TV shows from the aughts? We need that nerd mail. Bring it in. And also, if you want to see what we know we missed and put on our also ran lists, you're going to want to be on that Patreon. $3 or more per month gets you the newsletter and nerd hangouts in the future.
Yes. And our honorable mentions, which instead of making this a 2-hour episode, we're moving on to the newsletter and putting our honorable mentions. So write in, correct us, tell us what we missed, then go to Patreon.
That's it. I'm just going to bite my tongue and not start talking about all these other movies.
It's really hard, right? We could keep going. It's that time again, Rob. What's the nerdiest thing you did this week?
Oh, Annalise, here we go again. It wasn't enough that I was running Princes of the Apocalypse, the Dungeons and Dragons campaign. It wasn't enough that I had a second edition conversion D&D experience that I was writing. It wasn't enough that I'm also simultaneously running the Ghosts of Saltmarsh and Tales from the Yawning Portal in our bicycle campaign on Saturdays. I decided to start another one.
Of course you did.
So now I'm also running the D&D campaign, Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frost Maiden. And I have nerded out over the prep of this campaign more than any previous. I've got it set up we've got our players. We're 2 weeks out from the start of the game. I've got a planning document that I've made for myself where I have poured through the book. Icewind Dale takes place in like a frozen wasteland where the environment is very harsh, and the cold wind and the curse of the Frost Maiden to keep the sun from ever coming up and melting the eternal frost affects the storyline and the plot never before. So I have created not only a planning document for myself with all of these little tidbits about the setting and characters, but I've also created a player document where I am in bite-sized chunks every day releasing a little bit more about the setting to get the players excited and hyped and help them round out their characters before they show up with one. I'm super excited about the campaign. I am super excited about nerding out about the campaign, and we have almost started, but I've started in overdrive as far as the prep and things like that.
What I hear you saying is that I should check my email for tidbits of stuff.
Honestly, I swear to God, if you don't do the assigned reading, I will kick you right out of that campaign. I'm working so hard.
I'll check my email.
The whole point of the daily is it takes you less than 5 minutes a day. Otherwise, we're going to start the game. You're going to be like, what? You're going to open up this 14-page thing and be like, I'm not going to read that.
I didn't know there was a daily. So now that I know,
You're not getting emails from me every day at 7:30?
That's a good question.
And also, that was very clearly stated in the first email sent.
Hold on.
You are breaking my heart right now.
Hold on. I might not be getting them. Hold on. Let me open up my email here. How many have you sent?
I've sent one every day for the last week. I'm going to send.
I see one from September 9th. That was yesterday.
Yeah. And then there should be one for the 8th and one for the 7th.
I have just a lot of email. No, it's getting buried. So if I see the one from 9th, like all the rest that I can see for that day are on the 9th. So I have a lot of email in the inbox. So I will go through.
Oh, because I was sending them separately so they wouldn't all be buried in the same one. Is that not working?
Sending them separately is probably really smart. The email address that I have, is for everything. So I get so much email that it's getting buried. Now that I know it's there, like I know I glimpsed one that said the dates. I haven't even gone through my calendar yet. So give me an opportunity to do that. I'll start reading them. I didn't know. I honestly didn't see that it was a thing. Give me a pass on this one. I've never been a principal before.
Never.
Well, I'm excited to play a paladin, but I can't say it was the nerdiest thing I did this week because I made that character
Because you didn't do it.
I made that character like a month ago.
Oh my God. Well, it's going to be not as good as it could be. So didn't do the.
I will do it.
Everybody else is like texting me like, "Oh my God, what can I do with this? Oh, should I do my backstory like this? Oh, what if I put that in my thing?" Not on these crickets from my best friend.
Yeah, maybe my best friend could have thrown me a rope and said, "Hey, have you read my emails?"
That's what the first email says.
Yeah, I don't even remember what the first email says.
Is there
I just
an email you would prefer me to send them to?
No. All of them. I have like 3 emails. There's not one that's better. So I will go and read them. I promise. I did not know anything. I will be really honest. You sent the email about announcing it, and all I did was I didn't read it all. I responded and said, "I'm a paladin," and then I clicked as keep as unread, and I have not gone back to my email since. When did you send that one out? A week
6th.
ago, maybe the 6th, beginning of this week. I haven't checked my personal email all week this week. That's how this week has been for me. Give me a pass. Now that I know that they are there, I know I should go check them. Like I'll check them every evening.
I'll replace you in a second. You think there's not a throng of people who would love to
I'm
be
sure
in this
there are.
game, Annalise, and do their reading? You think?
No, go ahead. I can back out. You can invite someone else.
Annalise, what's the nerdiest thing you did this week?
I guess it's going to be finding someone to replace me on your D&D game. Oh, that's next week. Sorry. Nerdiest thing I did this week. I finished Ted Lasso. I know on the podcast, I say a lot that I don't really have time to watch television. I have very minimal time here and there. Usually I just have to put something on for noise while I'm working. I'm stuck on MCU right now because I am on Wakanda Forever, and I have not felt like I'm in a place to watch however they tribute Chadwick Boseman. I am not ready for it. So I've avoided watching. So I've stopped watching MCU stuff. That's usually my go-to when I have time.
Jump over to Star Wars instead. While MCU is kind of getting worse, Star Wars is getting better.
Getting better. Yeah. Good call. I haven't watched Mandalorian. I have not watched Andor. I've not watched
that's where the heat is right now. That's where the heat is.
Okay. Maybe I will switch over until I'm like more mentally ready to watch Wakanda Forever. But as I mentioned earlier in the episode, I'm a new principal. I mean, that's not the first time I've mentioned it, but being a new principal, I thought I've seen memes about leadership lessons from Ted Lasso. So I thought it was a good one, and it's relatively lighthearted, and funny, fish out of water, lots of those tropes. Being an American who's only coached American football, being hired to one of the Premier League soccer programs in England, really good with character building. This week, I finished watching the last few episodes of the series. The series is over. I'm watching this late, of course. And I thought it was really good. The character building was just phenomenal. And yes, leadership lessons, and also understanding that there really can't be someone like him in real life, but maybe there are. Ned Flanders, I don't know, would have made a good soccer coach. So I finished watching it. It was really good. I know you haven't seen it, Rob, but maybe it's
I'm one of the few people. And I've actually used this to describe myself to people as well. I'm like, that show Ted Lasso, and people's eyes light up and they're like, yeah, how like you recommend it to everybody. It's like something everybody's got to watch, and you got to find somebody and tell them about that show because it's so positive and people will love it. Yeah. I'm the one person on earth who multiple people have told me, don't watch that show. You hate it.
I don't think you'll hate it. I think you'll enjoy the characters. I'm not one of the people saying, tooting its horn saying everyone must watch this. There are things that I personally got out of it. There are things that made me laugh. There are things that made me sad. I mean, it is a really well-written show, and I will say that alone, I think you would enjoy. You are a sports fan enough, and there is real sports dilemma in it, I think you would enjoy it. But that would be bits and pieces of it. I don't think it's one that you would rave and say, like, I really need to finish this series. I do think the character Ted Lasso is a little hard to take in some circumstances. Doesn't make sense. But I will say Jason
Momoa.
I want to say it's Sudeikis. Jason Sudeikis. Jason Sudeikis does a really, really good job showing emotion that's not this positive Ned Flanders character in a real way. They do it visually. When Ted Lasso's in a bad place, and he's drinking alone and dealing with his divorce and someone comes knocking on his door to check on him. His hair is messed up and he's wearing a dirty shirt, and it's not that prim and proper Ned Flanders that you see when he's out and about. He also, and this is spoiler, if you are someone who hasn't watched it, he starts having panic attacks, and the realism of what he's going through is very, very strong. And they turn it to something very poignant in talking about mental health of professional athletes and how we talk about it. And I think they do a really good job with some of these storylines. So it's not all positive. It's not all like, yippee yay yay yay. They do a really good job with the characters. Would you love it? I don't think you would love it. I think you would watch it and say that's something I watched. I don't think you would hate it. Every season, we have an episode focused on one superhero. This season, our spidey senses took us to the Wonder Kid himself, Spider-Man. Join us in 2 weeks for web-slinging discussion.
I can't wait.
Remember to subscribe, share, and give us that 5-star rating wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on social media platforms @NerdBestFriends, or send us a message by writing to podcast@nerdbestfriends.com. Off to the newsletter, best friend.
Fun episode this week. Thank you for listening.
See you next time.
Hey, it's me. It's me, Rob. It's me. Gotta get clean.
Welcome back to another. Woo! All right. Take 5. The main character, and why am I blanking on his name? I watch this movie all the time. Red is the other guy. Andy, thank you.
Oh, Andy Dufresne. Why do we do these TV shows? I can't remember actor names for crap. Will Wheaton. I heard about this show because Will Wheaton.
Wait, he's one of the nerd gods. Come on now.
This is what I'm telling you, Annalise. I'm so bad with names.
Okay. All right.
You're lucky I'm not calling you Jim or
Sweet
something.
fantasy Will Wheaton.
Sweet fantasy Will Wheaton.